Good afternoon, everyone. There are some advantages and disadvantages of speaking last. I think one of the disadvantages is that many of what you intend to say have been already covered by a lot of the speakers before. Okay, so the title of the forum is the disruption or development. And I think the recent events in Guyana have partially provided us with an answer to that question. And it seems that things are leaning more towards disruption than development. So what I will seek to do here is to explain, one, why the country is more inclined towards, or seems to be more inclined towards development, or caught in what Taron usually referred to as an underdevelopment trap. I heard both Taron and David Hines address the issue of insecurities and the ethnic insecurity dilemma in line with other writers or thinkers and commentators in Guyana, such as Ravi Dev and Betaram, and so. Taron in his paper went a little further, however, and hypothesized that there's a relationship between pro-ethnic voting and underdevelopment and the ethnic insecurities. My argument is trying to go a little, dig a little more into the root of things and to posit a relationship between the ethnic security dilemma itself and the degree, and this is important, the degree and nature of the structural cleavages in the society, Guyana in this case. From my own research, I found that not all societies characterized by multiple ethnicity produced ethnic insecurity dilemmas or underdevelopment. It is important, therefore, to have a grasp of what type of cleavage structure within the society is more likely to lead to these problems that are outlined by the previous speakers, and what kinds of cleavage structure are more promotive of consensus and development. So I will be doing that, and apart from that, it's also important to know if there are any short-term or medium-term, which is preferable to long-term solutions that are capable of effecting a transition from a less to a more consensus-building society. So starting with the first, the distinctive feature of the structural cleavages we have in Guyana is that there is a high, though not absolute nor perfect, correlation between what I would want to refer to as different modes of differentiation or different social divisions. And I'll break that down as I go. The various modes of differentiation could be further categorized under structural and institutional modes of differentiation. The structural modes of division or differentiation would include things like geographic settlement. I was reading a paper recently by Mohammed that talks about geographic pluralism in Guyana. And it's a dimension of this social structure or social cleavage in Guyana that is largely disregarded and noted is largely disregarded. I see Taron is currently working the importance of geography back into his economic analysis and so, which is good. But there's a geographic division in Guyana that is very significant. There are three main groups in Guyana. The indigenous peoples, they live largely in interland communities. The Indo-Guyanese live largely in rural communities. Afro-Guyanese live largely in urban communities. So there's clear geographic differentiation between these groups. Stacked on this geographic differentiation, there are other structural separations, such as occupation. Of course, those working in the agricultural sector is more likely to come from rural areas. Those working in the urban, in the public sector, more likely to come from urban areas. So there's this correlation, not perfect or not absolute, as I said, between geographic differentiation of the various groups and their occupation. And of course, there's also phenotypical differences. Indigenous peoples, Afro-Guyanese, Indo-Guyanese. Along with these structural differences, they are stacked upon these are also differences in their primary and secondary institutions. Kinship, for one, according to social contact theory, it's more highly likely to form kinship relationships with persons who share the same geographic location with you, persons who work in the same occupation with you, and so forth. So, of course, this leads to another dimension of the cleavage structure, whereby occupational, geographic, now kinship, and phenotypical differences all are stacked on each other. What this provides is a foundation for the emergence of higher level institutions, which lead ultimately to the national institution, or the most universalizing institution, which is the government. But the different stacks, or the different dimensions, isn't yet completed. There are now, along with these structural divisions, we also have, or emerging from these structural divisions, we now have primary and secondary institutions, one of which is trade unions, cultural associations, and political parties. If you study any one of these, you would see the clear correlation between these and the other social divisions that I've talked about. So what this creates is a heavily stacked system, self-sustaining, self-replicating communities, or to use the term by M.G. Smith, who was very skeptical about the term ethnicity. He called these corporate groups. So the fact these heavily stacked communities create what are called in the literature sharp boundaries. And the security dilemma, or the insecurities that were outlined by speakers before, depend as a historical and a theoretical priority on the former or prior existence of these boundaries. If the boundaries are sharp, then there are distinct groups with distinct interests, with distinct insecurities that are ready to be used for political mobilization purposes. If the boundaries are blurred, this becomes less a reality, because politicians now have to mobilize across boundaries rather than just within specific boundary markers. So the coincidence of these various modes of differentiation, as I said, create sharp boundaries and result in what is also called in the literature the opportunity structures, and it makes it easy for politicians to mobilize along these boundaries rather than along less sharp boundary lines. For example, the larger part of both the African and the East Indians and the indigenous people population are poor working class people. But for some reason, there is a difficulty to submerge the ethnic interests to the benefit of their class interests. And why that is so? My thesis is because the nature of the cleavages in the society, the nature of these boundaries, make that difficult, though not impossible. The existence of these already assembled communities, as I said before, provides what is called in the literature opportunity structures, and they make it easy for mobilization by political or cultural or economic elites. These communities, these self-sustaining, self-replicating communities, have issues naturally that they would want to be championed at the level of the nation. Among the indigenous communities, these are land rights, among other things, ancestral land rights, among other things, which is an emerging issue now even in the African Guyanese community. Among the Indo-Guyanese, these insecurities relate to the dominance of Afro-Guyanese in the public sector and especially in the security forces, because in times of ethnic conflict, the claim is that Afro-Guyanese have the immediate access to the arms and so forth. For the Afro-Guyanese, it's the dominance, is the numerical dominance of the Indo-Guyanese group, and in a democratic competition where numbers mean a lot, they can be left in opposition for a long time, which has been the case for a number of years. So these issues exist at community level. All communities have their own community-specific issues. These issues are then used as mobilizing strategy to whip up community support by aspiring politicians or even politicians that are already established in the political arena. Even if these issues don't exist, my point is that they will be created just for the purpose of political mobilization. And even if they exist but to an insignificant extent, they will be blown out of proportion for the purpose of political mobilization. And other issues that cut across communities, though they exist, they wouldn't or are not used as the basis of political mobilization. That is because the fact that already assembled communities exist, politicians find it easier to use those communities as political base. Right? So it is with these, it is with the support of these sectoral interests or sectional interests that politicians ascend to power. And because of this, the logic of government becomes subverted more likely than not by these sectional interests. So broad, abstract universalist ideals such as democracy, such as good governance and so forth, while important, will be secondary to these sectional interests or these community interests, because politicians receive their raison d'etre, their reason for existence from sectional interests. So to make things clearer, so we have what I've just outlined, like cleavages or communities with sharp borders, and these give rise to group-based insecurities, group-based issues that are ready to be mobilized and ready to be used as the basis of political mobilization. And of course, politicians, political and even cultural entrepreneurs use these insecurities as the basis of their political activism. And the political activism, therefore, has to respond to the needs and interests and insecurities of the communities with these very sharp, distinct borders and boundaries. And that is how we get ethnopolitics, the pandering to ethnic interests and so forth, which eventually leads to what Taron would refer to, suboptimal development in economics, distribution, institutional development, and so forth. So the theoretical connection that I want to draw here that I think is important is that we have, at one level, we have the structural cleavages, which are not the same in all societies or all countries. And the nature and depth of these cleavages are significant, they are important because they are essential in producing a particular kind of mobilization strategy and a particular kind of politics. So it is important in our analysis that we do not disregard or pay scant attention to the nature of and depth of these structural cleavages. And I'm saying and stressing this because many of the solutions that we have talked about in the public arena and public sphere take these as given, as immutable facts, that as sacred facts that should not be manipulated to bring about the kind of behavior that we want to come about.